Perbahasan berkaitan pendanaan untuk mengawal perubahan iklim di COP29 terlampau lambat untuk dimuktamadkan. Memasuki minggu terakhir persidangan itu di Baku, Azerbaijan, perunding negara dunia masih gagal capai kata sepakat yang membolehkan inisiatif dirancang jelas dapat dilaksanakan. Namun, sektor perbankan yang turut hadir di COP29 turut menyuarakan pandangan soal pendanaan. Editor Kanan Dzulfitri Yusof bertemu Ketua MIND Kelestarian Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad BPMB Joel Khaw Chuan Penn.
Terima kasih rakan-rakan setugas niaga awani yang berada di Kuala Lumpur untuk persidangan perubahan iklim COP29 yang berlangsung di Baku. Hari ini merupakan hari kembalinya kami ke Blue Zone dan juga di Green Zone kerana semalam bercuti sehari. Tapi perincian dan juga perbahasan mengenai climate change dan juga climate finance itu masih belum dimuktamadkan. Malah sebilangan pengkritik dan juga aktivis mengatakan bahawa terlampau lambat untuk dimuktamadkan hal berkaitan dengan climate finance. Tapi dalam masa yang sama, minggu ini adalah minggu yang terpenting bagi memastikan bahawa adakah para perunding di COP29 berjaya mencapai kata sepakat di Baku ini. Tapi dalam konteks Asia Tenggara, kita juga berbincang mengenai adaptasi dan juga bagaimana kita melihat keperluan dana khususnya berkaitan perubahan iklim di rantau negara-negara ASEAN. Baru-baru ini ada juga satu sesi khusus mengenai perkara ini. Dalam konteks ini kita bersama dengan beberapa wakil daripada Malaysia, Indonesia dan juga dari Filipina dan juga dari Singapura. Dan saya berkesempatan bersama dengan saudara Joel Khaw. Beliau merupakan head ataupun ketua MIND dan juga Kelestarian di Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad. Beliau merangkumkan sedikit sebanyak sesi tersebut.
So our session earlier on was on adaptation and the funding needs. Some of the key points were that, say for example, there's a lot of effort put into climate mitigation to reduce, to decarbonize carbon emissions, and rightly so. But however, for countries like Malaysia and also across the ASEAN region, where our carbon emissions is not as high as some of the major polluter. However, the cost of climate mitigation is so huge that perhaps we should also look at climate adaptation. And to address climate change is a very complex area, and I think a robust strategy to address both mitigation and adaptation, the balancing of it is really important for both the government and also the stakeholders involved, including the banks.
Dalam temu bual saya bersama dengan Joel, beliau mengatakan bahawa ramai yang melihat dalam konteks di Malaysia kita melakukan proses adaptasi dan juga mitigasi dalam pembinaan infrastruktur. Namun ada sesuatu perkara yang paling mudah untuk dilakukan yang berkaitan dengan pendidikan dan juga kesedaran mengenai perubahan iklim. Dengan perkara itu, ia akan lebih memudahkan lagi proses adaptasi berkenaan dengan impak dan juga cara-cara untuk menyelesaikan perubahan iklim di Malaysia.
To address climate adaptation, there's a few things that we need to really look at. One of the areas is also the low-hanging fruit in terms of education, in terms of creating capacity, in creating awareness. Say for example, our budget 2025, the government allocated 150 million for drainage cleaning. I think one of the areas is that we don't have a good policy for segregation of waste, for example. People steal litters around, as we can see. And there's only so much money you can put into infrastructure projects, right? Looking at the fiscal limitation that we have, I think it would be worthwhile to start with the low-hanging fruit. And moving from that, I think policies could then support funders like a blended way of between public and the private sector to come in to finance some of these projects. Policies that were shared by one of our speakers from Singapore, Melissa, was that the local government, in terms of the building, they require, in terms if you build a certain size, you're required to build a retention pond, you're required to build a green roof. Those are some of the mitigation for flood and also for heat waves. And when it's embedded within the policy, it makes it easier for the banks to come in to finance, because we are theoretically financing an entire development, right? But with adaptation infrastructure to create resilience, not only for the building, for the benefit of the tenants, for the residents, but also for the surrounding area, because as you know, flood happens because water flows where it's easiest to flow. So having those kind of facilities within that not only supports the adaptation of that particular building, but also its surrounding. So I think in that way, I think we can also refer that into our local and municipal policies in terms of development planning, in terms of land use. Those are key areas in terms of addressing some of this adaptation.
Siapa yang membiayai projek kelestarian, siapa yang membiayai projek untuk perubahan iklim, itu tanda soalan yang cukup besar sekali, khususnya bagi institusi keuangan, dan ini jawapan beliau.
The question in terms of not only climate change but sustainability projects, right? The question is who pays for it. It always goes back to who is going to pay for it, because as a bank, we are steward of
Profit.
We're not steward of profit. We are stewards of depositors' money. So how bank work is they take money from depositors or investors, and then we will borrow, we will lend out the money, right? So we are stewards of those. We need to make sure that the projects that we finance generate the returns to pay back, to give back to our depositors, right? So in that sense, right, we have to be very careful in terms of what kind of projects that we want to finance, because we are not a charity. So, but in doing so, what can we do is the rate of margin, the margin of returns, we can play around with it, right? We can balance it out between certain type of projects. So it goes back to portfolio allocation, portfolio design of how much do I want to allocate for sustainability, for climate change, for this kind of projects, because all of them have different type of returns, and obviously you have to match it with the tenure, with the investors' mandate, etc., etc. For Bank Pembangunan, we have what we call the MIND framework, measuring impact, or what we call the measuring impact on national development. So what it does is, it's traditionally banks only look at profit, right? Like I mentioned earlier. So we are very good at risk management, looking at the credit profile, looking at the credit ratings. But beyond that, as a development financial institution, it's very important for us to acknowledge our role as a development bank, which is to support national development. That's why we came up with another tool, which is the MIND framework, to balance this out. So the MIND framework acts as the impact measurement function, impact measurement tool for us to measure the impact of the project that we finance. For example, if a project scores very high in terms of impact, but the credit profile might not be traditionally acceptable, we will still proceed to we will still consider financing those kind of projects. In contrast, in the reverse situation where credit rating is very good, however the impact is very low, as a development bank we won't do it, we won't finance it. So we are very clear in terms of what we want to do, because capital is limited. We want to make sure that it's channeled to where it matters most, to deliver impact capital for national development.
Secara khususnya juga bagaimana Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad memainkan peranannya bagi memastikan ada pembiayaan dan juga kesedaran dalam hal yang berkaitan dengan projek kelestarian dan juga projek yang membina daya tahan menghadapi perubahan iklim ini. Ini jawapan beliau. We are not as out there as commercial banks, because we only finance corporate loans, corporate clients. So usually it's our business team will reach out to customers. They will be out there hunting, but we also receive some of this from government-related companies. Also through our website, people can find out a bit more on the schemes that we provide. So we currently operate 6 schemes, which have interest subsidy function within it. So for those projects that qualify under some of these schemes, you get 1% for next year, 1% rebate on the cost of fund. So it includes Madani scheme, Madani development scheme, renewable and transition schemes, sustainable development financing schemes, to name a few. Suhu cuaca di Baku ini makin hari makin menurun, tapi itu saya harap tidak berlaku dalam persidangan COP29, dan mengharapkan lebih banyak diskusi yang lebih panas dan juga muktamadnya keputusan di persidangan kali ini. Banyak lagi saya kongsikan untuk rakan-rakan dalam Niaga Awani. Kita akan bertemu lagi dalam siaran dan juga dalam lintas langsung yang akan datang. Kembali bersama rakan-rakan setugas di studio.